After 32 years behind bars for a murder he always said he did not commit, and another year and a half with the threat of a retrial and more jail time over his head, Darrell Jones is now officially a free man. A jury found him not guilty yesterday in the 1985 shooting death of Guillermo Rodriguez in Brockton after just a 3-day trial and a mere 2 hours of deliberation. Jones's case was first highlighted by the New England Center for Investigative Reporting and WBUR, which uncovered evidence that his conviction may have been the product of racial animus by at least one member of the all-white jury. On top of that, there was the video testimony used to help convict Jones, which the court determined was tampered with by Brockton police. It actually briefly cuts to a 1950s TV show and potentially omits key exculpatory evidence. Following the reports at the end of 2017, a Superior Court vacated Jones's conviction and ordered a new trial shortly after. Since then, the altered video was deemed inadmissible and barred from the trial, but prosecutors were allowed to read witness testimony from the first trial, despite the defense's motion to exclude it after new statements from some of the witnesses contradicted their original testimony. But it did not sway the jury, and now Jones is free to move on with his life, something he told Greater Boston he hasn't been able to do since he was released on bail last year.
I haven't had the freedom from the moment that I've been out because I've still been under their watch and dealing with what they did to me, and you don't recover from it that quick. So I haven't taken it as freedom, although I've been happy to be around my family and friends. It just hasn't been freedom.
Jenifer McKim, Darrell Jones, and his attorney will join us next week. Joining me now is Jenifer McKim, the senior reporter behind the New England Center for Investigative Reporting's coverage of Darrell's case, who was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. Jenifer, thank you for being here.
Hi there.
Before we talk about the retrial and how it went down, can you tell me how you ended up covering this story to begin with?
So about 4 years ago, Darrell's wife at the time called me, invited, and said that there's this man in state prison who wanted to talk to me about criminal justice issues and invited me to go visit. So I went to Sousa Baranowski and met with him. He started to talk to me about issues within the system, and then I said, I'd like to hear about your story. He told me that he was wrongfully convicted, and I asked permission to sort of investigate his case.
So he didn't lead with his case?
He did not, no.
And were you apprehensive initially? Because I know, we in the media periodically get communications from prison, and we don't always assume that there's something legitimate in them, but you hopped right on it?
I was really interested when I started looking at his case because there were so many interesting issues related to the fact that there was no motive, there was no physical evidence, that all the eyewitnesses, no one identified him in court. And I also was allowed to use this as a great, I brought it to a class I teach at BU where we spent the semester investigating his case, which was a great way to learn.
Yeah. So he didn't have to go to trial, right? He had an option to plead guilty to a lesser charge and not serve any time. Am I right?
Correct. So after the judge vacated his case in 2017, the prosecutor said, we will offer you manslaughter with time served. And he said, no, I won't do that. I've always maintained I'm innocent.
So just as a matter of principle.
Right.
Did he have people counseling him to, well, you might want to go ahead and do this, you'll be out? Or did people?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if he would listen to that type of counsel, but he always maintained he was innocent. It hasn't sounded,
from what I've heard.
Exactly. And, I mean, basically, then he would be living the rest of his life with a manslaughter conviction on his record.
The DA didn't have to prosecute this either. Were you surprised that the DA didn't drop the case altogether?
Well, from my understanding, this is the first case that the state's innocence program has had to retry after a judge has vacated one of these cases. Other cases, prosecutors have said, it's been too long, we don't have enough evidence, we're going to dismiss it and not make you go through it. So it was a little surprising that they went through with this.
You have some audio, right, or obtained some audio of a juror who explained why it was that they only deliberated for 2 hours. Let's take a listen to that.
The state's job was to convince me that he did the crime, and throughout the whole procedure, I was not convinced. The evidence that we had was not enough. It was, and the defense poked a lot of holes on them. So, I mean, to convict someone just based on that, I don't think that would be fair.
That's a really damning assessment. Were you surprised to hear that?
Well, it was pretty surprising when first of all, that it was a 3-day trial was also just, all of it was so brief, and not even really 3 days. And it was given, the case was given to the jury yesterday afternoon, and within 2 hours we came back and were told that there was a verdict. That was pretty surprising. Almost less than 2 hours to make a decision. When I spoke with that juror, he pretty much told me they walked in there and they were all, there wasn't a lot of arguing. It was a unanimous at the beginning that he was not, there was not enough evidence to to prove him guilty.
Which also strikes me as a damning rebuke of the DA's decision to go ahead and try this again.
Well, it's interesting. There are definitely some questions about why the state decided to re-prosecute because there was so little evidence. I mean, it was really unusual. In this case, there were 6 witnesses' testimony that were read because either people had died or they declined to testify because they took the Fifth.
What was Darrell Jones's reaction when the verdict was announced?
So we got this spiel from the judge saying nobody can react in the court when it happens. So basically he said thank you and walked out, and he had a bunch of his supporters out there. They applauded. He went downstairs, immediately started talking about the criminal justice system and how he plans to not be a quiet man now. We
have, I think, courtesy of you, some audio of him after the verdict, right? Let's listen to that.
But I want to make something clear. Although I am celebratory about being home, when I was in there, I lost my grandmother, my brother, right, and my son. I'm celebrating the fact that I'm free, but I don't celebrate that they set me free because they shouldn't have had me anyway.
What specifically, when you say he's not going to be a quiet man, is he going to seek some sort of personal restitution, not like you can make up for a life lost unjustly behind bars? Is he going to seek personal restitution? Is he going to lead political campaigns for criminal justice reform? What do you expect?
Well, he hasn't told me his whole plan. I would assume that he was going to file for compensation. Yeah. He has rights under both state and federal laws to request for compensation, especially since the case was completely dropped. I am assuming that is going to move forward, but also when he came out there, he was talking about other people like him, he says, who were innocent, who are still in prison and really involved in being part of that process. There is a growing group of people in Massachusetts who have been released from prison, like Victor Rosario, Fred Clay, after decades, and they've really been sort of communicating and being a voice for people still there.
And I got to say, I haven't heard as much from the others, but when I've heard him weigh in at different points on GBH and elsewhere, he's just such, as we heard right there, such a compelling and effective messenger. He seems that way to me anyway.
It's really interesting. He's very eloquent for a person who was put in prison at the age of 18. I mean, when my students first spoke to him when we were at BU, he said, I'm an autodidact.
That's incredible. Jenifer McKim, thank you, and congratulations on getting this outcome with your reporting.